Hello everyone, welcome to my first video. Hopefully there'll be many more. What I'm going to be talking about today is changing my infusion site. The pump that I'm using is the Medtronic 670G, and whether or not you're using this pump shouldn't really matter too much. Your process is probably going to be pretty similar. So if you are using a different pump, a lot of times, like Medtronic especially, they'll use the same infusion set, so whether your device looks the same or different, likelihood is going to be that the process is going to be similar for you. So the first thing that I do is, now that I know that I'm out of insulin, is I disconnect my set. I have mine in my abdomen right now. Now sometimes I'll actually do the quick release and take it off. Sometimes I'll leave it on, but what I end up doing is just grabbing it and pulling it right off. Now something that's very important here, I'm going to try to keep everything so that you can kind of see the materials that I'm using. One thing that's pretty important is just to make sure that you stay sterile throughout this process. So usually actually when I do this, I like to do it right after a shower to change my set, just because you know, my body's clean. The chances of getting an infection from the infusion site are much less like that. It's just kind of a simple preventative way that you can do that. And so what I do is I just make sure that I keep it pretty clean, just as clean as possible. You know, give it a good wipe around the skin and everything. And I've never had, fortunately, an issue with an infusion site infection. And part of that is just being aware, keeping it clean, soap and water. If you do it right out, you get out of the shower, then all the better. So the next step for me is to take the reservoir out of the pump. So it's just a little left-hand twist. And then if you're using the Medtronic, like I am, what you're going to do is unlock it. You're going to go down to the options, pressing the middle button, reservoir and tubing, and then new reservoir. And then you'll press the rewind button. And you can actually hear it. And so what's happening, you probably won't be able to see, but what's happening is the little auger there is going to be sort of going back down into the pump like this. Instead of pushing the insulin out this way, it'll be rewinding. So pretty important step. It's easy to forget that one. If you try to put your new reservoir in while it hasn't rewound, then it's going to push the insulin all up, and you're going to have to start over. You'll waste the reservoir most likely in an infusion set. So the good news about Medtronic is they're pretty good about, you know, telling you what's going on, giving you prompts, go from step 1 to step 2, and so on and so forth. So now I've got the rewind complete, and it says new reservoir, fill reservoir, connect tubing to reservoir, but do not connect to body. Again, just really good, clear instructions there. So I'm going to push next, and the next instruction is actually to place reservoir and pump and lock. And so I'm not ready to get there, but my pump is all ready to go once I get everything else sort of set up. So the next thing that I do, this is just sort of my routine, and it works a little bit differently for everybody. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up my reservoir. I happen to use Humalog. The process is going to be the same regardless. Also, I'm using the Minimed reservoir. I think these are pretty standard across the board if you're using a Medtronic device. If you're not using Medtronic, it'll be something very similar to this. And I happen to use the Minimed Quick-Set. Now this is one thing that differs. Even if you have the 670G, chances are you're going to have a different infusion set. And so what I'll do is I'll post links at the bottom of this video for just a quick instruction on exactly how to use your infusion set, your Quick-Set. So usually tear right into this, and here is the infusion set. And I've actually already got a reservoir out, and here's the reservoir. So infusion set out of the box and reservoir out of the box. So I won't put this in the video, but just a reminder, make sure you wash your hands. I did wash my hands sort of before I got started here. So just make sure that you're trying to stay as sterile as possible throughout this process. It just really help you avoid any problems. Part of that also is going to be to take your insulin bottle and wipe the top of it. Again, it sort of seems like a no-brainer, but and it is, and it's just a really easy way to avoid getting an infection, which we really don't want to do. So I then fill up my reservoir, that's what we're calling this, with about as much insulin as I'm planning. So I usually fill mine up to about 240 units. So that's the big 2 and a couple hash marks. Yours might look a little bit different, but that's about how much I use. This is completely up to what you and your doctor agree on. This is just for instructional purposes again. Yours is going to be a little bit different, but the idea is that you want to put the same amount of air into the vial of insulin as insulin you want to take out. So I insert the air, and then I draw the insulin out. And one of the things that I pay particular attention to during this part of the process is trying to do it sort of slowly. So if you pull the plunger down really quickly, what's going to happen is that you're going to get little air bubbles in there. And I'm sort of crazy about air bubbles, and they're not really harmful, but you definitely don't want air bubbles in your infusion set or in your reservoir. So the slower you pull it, I found, the less likely you are to get air bubbles. Now, one thing that happens with these Medtronic sets, and I don't know if it'll come through on the camera, let's see here, is we'll get these little bubbles at the bottom here, at the very bottom, and you can see an air bubble at the top. And so that's something you can just give it a good flick, and you'll see the air bubbles sort of all going to the top. And so I try to push those little air bubbles right back up into the vial, and I wish this would come through better on the camera, but I don't think that it will. But just trust me that the air bubbles, they're going to go to the top, they're going to kind of break loose from the side if they're stuck on the reservoir, and then you can kind of just slowly put them back. Now, they do instruct you to not push too much insulin or any insulin at all, rather back into the vial. So as you're doing this, just try to stay conscious of that. Consider the reservoir sterile and the insulin bottle sterile. They're both sterile really, but you just want to avoid cross-contaminating. So I'll remove the bottle then. And again, just double check it for air bubbles. And I see a couple of little ones in there. And so usually what I do is I'll just put it on the ground because it's kind of flat and they're going to go straight up, and I'll just give it like a little push. And you can see sometimes like there'll be a little bit of insulin that comes out, but it'll be white, and so that's sort of saturated with air bubbles, and then you'll see the good clear insulin. That's usually how I indicate, and I just double check that there aren't any air bubbles here. Next is to remove the plunger at the bottom and then remove this little adapter piece that you use. So all you're left with is what looks like a little mini vial of insulin, only insulin, no air bubbles hopefully. At this point in time, we can kind of clear this stuff out of the way. We're going to use our infusion set. So we're going to connect the infusion set to the reservoir already filled with insulin. And so these are usually included in the quick sets that I use at least. So this is for like when you get in the shower or go swimming or something, you just connect the pump and then you put this over your infusion site, the part that is in your body. So just to show you, this is my old one. So you can kind of do the quick disconnect, and this would normally be resting on your body. And then you can use this piece to just sort of cover it up. And again, this is very specific to my infusion set, but it's just like a little saver there, just so nothing sort of gets into the connector part that basically helps put the insulin into your body from the pump. So this is what I pulled out of the box. This is a quick set infusion set. Has a little piece of tape here that just keeps the tubing from getting too tangled up. So I sort of rip that off, carefully obviously. And then I always try to get my tubing nice and straight, so I kind of know exactly how much tubing I'm working with. And then this end will go straight onto the vial exactly like this. And then you'll righty-tighty, turn it to the right, and you'll sort of feel it like snap, like it'll lock. And I usually give it just like a little tug just to make sure that it's on there snug. Sometimes maybe I miss it and it'll like pop off. So it shouldn't come off. It should be pretty secure on there if you put it in completely and turn it to the right to lock it. So from here, I'm actually ready to put the infusion set back into the pump. And so, well, my pump locked and turned off. So I'll just go right back to the load reservoir screen, which is sort of the first option that you have. I'll put it in, again, righty-tighty, and you'll see it's not completely in, and then you'll see we can turn it to the right, and it just sort of snaps in place. And you can see also how there's a clear plastic piece on the pump that actually lines up perfectly with the reservoir set. Oops, jeez, and don't do that. Okay, oopsie. All right, no harm, no foul. So that's just this little piece right here. And now that it's in there securely, what we're gonna do is press the load reservoir button again. And then the message says new reservoir, fill a reservoir, connect tubing to reservoir, do not connect the body. We already saw that, so we're gonna hit next. Place reservoir into pump, and it still says in big letters, do not connect the body. So we're not doing that yet because what we're doing now is priming the infusion set. So there's only air in this tubing right now. You don't want to connect the set to your body with air in the tubing. So you want to make sure that the tubing is full of insulin before you connect it to your body. And so that's what we're going to do now. So I hit next again, and then I have a load reservoir. So what we're going to do now is actually push and hold with my pump. Everybody's is a little bit different. And you should be able to hear it sort of winding. And you can see the little demo on the screen too, the little arrows. So that means that it's sort of moving the piston part up to the bottom of the reservoir. So now the pump, the piston is in contact, so it's ready to start actually pumping the insulin. So I'll press next and then fill. And so again, I'm going to press and hold. So now if you look closely, you can actually see the insulin pumping through the tubing. And then as soon as the little drops come out, you can stop. So that means that the tube is completely filled with insulin at this point in time. So it'll tell you how much. My experience is that I use the same infusion set. So that's 10.2 units that filled it up. I know mine are about 10 to 12 units any given time. If there's little air bubbles mixed up, it'll be a little bit more, but it's not necessarily the same. But just so you kind of have an idea of how much insulin had to go to fill up, once again, this tubing. So we'll do go over to next. And then the next one is insert infusion set into body. So what I'm going to do now is I place the infusion set and I leave this little protective blue cap on. And then I use my sil-serter device. That's what they call this. And they all look a little bit different. Sometimes they're even built into the infusion sets, but this is what mine looks like. So if you're using one similarly to this, I leave the blue cap on the entire time that I'm doing this. And you can set it in there, make sure that this little blue part is aligned, and sort of make sure it's firmly seated in there. Hopefully that came through on the camera, but you just kind of like slightly push it down. The next part that I do is I take off the tape. And then I'll actually go ahead and cock it. So now it's ready to go. And then the very last thing that I do is take the needle protector off. Just so all the while, sometimes I get a little shaky if my blood sugar is like a little messy or if I've been drinking too much coffee. Just so if I slip or drop it or something, the needle isn't in danger of poking me or being bent or something, because then you have to start all over. So I've got the pump with my infusion set, the tubing is primed, my sil-serter device is cocked and ready to insert. And the very last thing that I'm going to do before I do that is, once again, with my alcohol prep pad, I'm going to clean the area. So I'm going to actually just go to the other side of my abdomen. So I know I'm only going to need a little bit for the sil-serter, but I'll clean really a good area of it. And I can do another video at some point in time about actually selecting the site. I'll blow on it a little bit, make sure that the alcohol is dry. They do recommend inserting standing up, because when you sit down, your skin kind of scrunches up, and then you put it on, there's like a sticker on there, and then you set up and it can kind of pull and distort it a little bit. So they say basically you want your skin to be as tight as it would like naturally be before you put it on. So I'll find a spot that I'm going for. And then for this one has two little release tabs on the side. And so I'll put it on, make sure that I'm not tangled up, make sure that this microphone cable isn't tangled on me. And I'll press both of them just like that. And with mine in particular, I push this gray button, which will release it. And so this is what's left on my body. So now the needle and the cannula, which is a little plastic piece that stays under your skin, is under my skin. So this is a trick that I found that's helped me do a successful infusion set almost every time. And that is actually to push down, not too much, but to just push down just to make sure that the needle and the cannula have gone in completely. And then I'll hold the infusion piece, the plastic piece, and then pull the needle right out. And this set is pretty handy because, so there's the needle that actually inserts the cannula, and you don't really need a sharps container because you just snap it into place and now it's safe. So that is the finished product. Hopefully you can get a good picture of that. Next, I'll go back to the pump, and the last option is to fill the, do you want to fill the cannula basically? And the answer is yes, fill cannula. Now this is something that should have already been set up in your settings. Mine is 0.3 to fill the, I'm using a 6mm cannula, and you can see that on your box. So it's about 0.3 for a 6mm cannula. So you shouldn't have to change that. That should already be set up in your settings. And then I'll press fill now. And so that's not actually inserting insulin, injecting insulin into your body or pumping insulin into your body. That's only filling this little plastic piece that rests under your skin. And that's called the cannula. It's just a little plastic guy. So they figure about 0.3 units will fit into that. So now it's full. And at this point forward, your pump is actually working, delivering your basal rate. So the last little tip that I'll give for this, again, I just want to say that in my experience, whenever I've had a problem with my pump failing, the cannulas can get bent or get clogged or blocked. It's been right at the time that I change my infusion site. And so basically what I've learned and what I practice is being extra vigilant in the 1 to 2, 3 hours after I change my infusion set. Just to make sure I check my blood sugar right when I change the set, and then again in an hour or two, just to make sure that I'm getting insulin, because again, anytime that I've had crimps or kinks in the cannula, issues with insulin delivery, it always happens right after I change it. If I am like a day or two into my infusion set, rarely have I had a problem, maybe never have I had a problem with delivery. It's always right when I change. So I just try to stay extra vigilant. The other thing that I do is I just plan on having a snack. And so right after I change, and so what I'll do is I'll actually give myself a pretty good bolus. I usually plan on having a pretty sizable snack, or if it's not a snack, if you're not hungry, a glass of orange juice or something. And so I just go ahead and pump 3 units. So, and my blood sugar is normally right now, I didn't show you guys that. So I go ahead and pump 3 units. So what this does is makes it so that if there's a clog right now, the sensor will detect that there's backflow or that it's not being delivered, and you'll get a no delivery alarm. So when you're pumping a lot of insulin or 3 units of insulin, the no delivery alarm is going to be much more sensitive to 3 units than a very low basal rate. So the chances of getting a no delivery alarm are much higher if you're pumping 3 units than if you're just relying on the basal rate to sort of trigger the sensor. So the other thing that this does is sometimes when you inject, the cannula can get sort of clogged with blood or other interstitial fluids. And so what this does is kind of just clears it out and really primes your site, like underneath your skin. A good tip, since I've been doing this, I don't know that I've ever had an issue with an infusion site. Before I started doing this, I was having them every once in a while, and it's very frustrating because all of a sudden, you know, you think you're good, and then you realize, well, I haven't gotten any insulin in 3 hours, and you feel horrible, and it's just a really bad experience. So that's everything for this. I'm not going to go through, I've got all this trash and plastic and stuff, leftover stuff, which is sort of the one thing that drives me crazy about, you know, changing my infusion sites is all the trash and stuff left over. So just make sure that you dispose of everything appropriately, safely. Please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube page. I'm going to keep trying to come with diabetes educational videos, share my insight. I'm a professional diabetic. I'm a medical student. So I have a lot of insiders and outsiders perspective on this thing from a medical perspective. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or write them in the comments. If you have any ideas for future videos, please, again, send me an email, write it in the comment. Share this with your friends and family if you think they'll benefit from it. Thank you.